So thank you, everybody. We know day 2, everyone having a good time. Oh, look, my people here. So welcome to our session. We're going to go ahead and get started. And we have our team up here that will all do some introductions in a little bit. But I wanted to give you some background on what kind of promoted this. Last year at ISS, we heard different experiences and topics about the whole continuum. And we, as well as some other people, I don't know if Katie's in here. Katie joined us at one time, but we started having monthly calls where we would just get together and say, what are your pain points? What happened? What did you do? And we started realizing we all had different resources. So literally the past year, we've been meeting and taking notes and problem solving, which when it came for call for papers, we thought, oh, maybe we could reflect what we learned. So the presentation is a lot of tools for you guys. Our goal is that you leave with something tangible that you could use. Or if you're a clinician, or sorry, a vendor, you can bring this to your clinician team. So the first part of it is very heavy resources that we're going to fly through because our intention is to do just that, give you some samples. And then we'll slow down a little bit and do some problem solving cases. But the first part is going to be a little fast. And we did upload the handouts. And if you need additional PDFs, you can give us a call. And at the end of it, if you think, hey, I want to kind of join this little circus of calls, we're going to continue to just have those powwows throughout the year. So this is our fearless leaders, the dream team. So we have Kathy, Rachel, Vince, and I'm Teresa. We don't have any conflicts of interest. And our objectives are to talk about the CRT service division process from inpatient to outpatient, give you at least 2 ideas to improve the continuum. And we're going to tap a little bit into the loaner versus rental chair. I'm going to give Kathy a chance to talk about, so you understand what our system looks like. Do you have the microphone?
I have this one. So I work at UAB Hospital in Birmingham, Alabama. We are the 8th largest academic hospital system in the United States. And so we're a big place and a lot's going on. The outpatient clinic I work in is housed inside the inpatient rehab building. You can see there what's coming for us. We have broken ground on a brand new building, which I'm so thankful because we will now have control over the heat and the air. And some of the smells that go along with a 60-year-old building will be gone. But we'll have a brand new building, $135 million building, which means for outpatient, this is part of this continuum we've worked through, is instead of now being 1 floor from inpatient rehab, where we can really have those conversations running up and down the stairs, they're moving all of outpatient services for us off campus to develop more of a get your outpatient care in your community. You'll come to the downtown area for your acute and surgery, post-op follow-up and inpatient rehab. So that's going to create another hurdle for us on this continuum process. But that's a little bit about UAB Hospital in Birmingham.
Okay. UPMC, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, has a few dozen hospitals. The Rehab Institute, the main Rehab Institute is in downtown or uptown Pittsburgh. It has specialty units, spinal cord injury, brain injury, stroke, and an amputee orthopedic unit. The Rehab Institute also exists in a lot of our satellite hospitals. The Rehab Institute also captures CAT, or Center for Assistive Technology, which is where Vinny is. I'm there a little bit, and then inpatient a little bit. And the Rehab Institute also captures 5 transitional care units, 70 something outpatient units. And moral of the story is it's literally all over the place. So all of Western Pennsylvania, some of New York, some a little bit of Ohio, a little bit of West Virginia, a little bit of Maryland. So while we have all of these great things in Pittsburgh, including CAT, which you can see what's there, that's sort of our hub for AT and CRT. We're also, the big challenges are that we're capturing from a big area for our inpatient units and then discharging all over the place to home health, to remote outpatient centers, sometimes to our outpatient neuro center in the city, which is not near CAT nor near the inpatient unit. So we're sort of all over the place. There's no up and down the stairs to do resolving issues. But we do have a lot of resources because it's so large. So pros and cons to the really big medical center.
Just add a couple small things for the clinic itself. for the Center for Assistive Technology. So while Rachel did a very good summary of the entire process, the clinic itself, just to dive a little bit deeper into it, we do have 5 different programs that are involved in it. And something that we're focusing on our discussion today is going to be purely on the seating and mobility side of it for that inpatient, for the Rehab Institute to this outpatient care. But a very unique thing about the clinic too that we're looking into is actually not going to be in a traditional outpatient hospital clinic anymore, and more into a physician's office. So another model switch that we're kind of seeing how that's going to work in the future, and kind of work as a team to see how that can promote better care in the future too.
Great. I'll use this one. So Ohio State is under complete construction. So instead of putting our buildings, I put my team up there. So this is a team. Several of them are here today supporting us. Thank you very much. I started my career inpatient. So I did 11 years inpatient rehab at Dodd, where I was lucky to start our seating clinic, our seating services. Then I switched over to outpatient, and I've spent about equal, or probably actually now more time in outpatient. So we have a assistive technology center that has the disciplines that you see up here. So not only seating and positioning, but we do have a large driving program and with speech therapists, and we have a smart clinic, and we have 2 rehab engineers. So we've actually been starting to look at some of the workflows and pathways that have worked in seating and starting to apply them to tracking cases and doing some of the continuity in the other services, which has been really fun. So now that we've told you who we are, just to give us a pulse of the room, how many clinicians that do the recommendations as a therapist do we have in here? Great, wonderful. How many suppliers do we have? Great. So you guys are our partners in care. Manufacturers. Great. So we pull you into the clinic too. We know you have a strong role. We're not going to spend a ton of time on it, but we want to recognize your role that you have. Any physicians, PAs, nurse practitioners, any medical team members in here? Because we know they're an important member. Case managers, funding. Was that a hand? No. Funding representatives. Any policy people brave to come? Funding? Yay. Policy. Yay. Glad you're here. Anyone that I missed? PhD student. Yes, very good. Another Buckeye. So as we think about the service delivery process, we want to remind everybody that there's the wheelchair service provision guide that is in the revision stage. You should be hearing about it soon. This is definitely the foundation of what we should be doing for service delivery across the continuum, and not only in wheelchairs, but we're modeling this, like I said, in our driving program and our AAC. So we wanted to remind everybody that if you haven't seen this guide, these are the components of it. We're going to touch upon each of these through our presentation and offer some suggestions on, validate why this is important. And we encourage you to go to the RESNA website and download it and look for the new modified one that is going to be coming out. So the next chunk is giving you some examples. This is the section we're going to take pretty quick, because we think that you should have written procedures and guidelines. We can't get mad at each other if we haven't told each other our expectations. So clinicians have expectations of the suppliers, and the suppliers should have expectations of the clinicians. We really haven't dove into the vendor or the manufacturers ones, but it's just acknowledging what all of our roles and responsibilities are. Large institutions like all of us have these huge umbrella vendor agreements, organizations that sometimes get intimidating, but then also have some of the same tenets about, like, you can't accept gifts and some of those other components. But we're going to give you examples of the big ones, but then also ones within maybe your department. We're going to talk about quarterly annual meetings, some future opportunities, tracking, and these are the sections we're going to go through. So I'm going to pass it to Vince. He's going to go through their document that they have.
Yeah, so like Teresa mentioned, we do have our overarching document that really lists all the policies and procedures for UPMC's and entire hospital system. So this is something that every clinic within the UPMC network has to follow, has to abide by as UPMC policy. And all 5 programs within the clinic, seating and mobility, audiology, AAC, adaptive driving, and RAT, all have to really follow these policies when interacting with vendors. And it's really just cut and dry across the board. So very basic stuff that everybody's aware of. Don't accept gifts. Make sure you're acting appropriately in clinic, and it kind of details out what happens if you have some kind of misconduct in clinic. So basically, it's like a 3-strike rule with repercussions on each of the stages. So that's listed throughout our actual UPMC policy. And so we actually have new guidelines that we're implementing based on each one of our programs. So seating mobility specifically, reworking those agreements to make sure that it's geared directly towards that profession.
So we have sections of it highlighted that are one big document. What you see here is defining the vendors, defining the code of conduct. We know you can't read this, but again, you can go to the handout, but it kind of breaks down more specifically. And continuing through slide 17. And so it's pretty comprehensive. Did you want to go through those?
No, I just want to add one thing at the
Yeah.
end here. So one thing I would like to point out that actually came up earlier in one of the discussions was the ethics and compliance portion. We know right now across the board, I think the most recent ethics publication that came out of the University of Iowa was somewhere around like 50% of ATPs right now like failed the ethics test that they provided. And so having something in here in the overall policy, I think is extremely helpful. And something that as a clinician and as a health profession as a whole, it's something that we could really dictate and hold that high ethical policy for everybody that comes into clinic, not just vendors, but everybody. So I just want to point that out too.
Great. Pass it to Kathy.
All right. So how many in here work in inpatient rehab? Okay. And so are you all doing evaluations while patients are in inpatient rehab? Do you also get to do the final fit? No. Okay. So most of you do not do the final fit, right? So some of you get a chance to get them back. Do you experience that black hole of that patient goes home and you hope to Almighty God they get to the therapist that will help do the right fit, and that the supplier, when you recommended this, is actually what gets delivered and you just hope it happened? Are you in that same boat I was in also? So that's what has led to, where are the gaps? How can we bridge them? How can we improve communication? How can we work with our suppliers to have these kind of mutual agreements amongst one another that we can bridge those gaps and ensure the follow through and the outcomes happen, that you set your goals in inpatient rehab. And that if you send them to me in the outpatient clinic, I know what your intentions were, what your goals were, what you saw there. So we make sure it happened. So at UAB, I'm just a boots on the ground therapist. I'm a staff physical therapist. I have a manager who has a manager and who has umpteen bosses. Anybody else have more bosses like that? So I have to answer to those things, but also ensure the communication flow happens. So when I go and say, okay, I feel like we need a means of communication that will help us navigate this when we come to trying to figure out what those expectations are. You have 3 different centers here who are at 3 different phases of development throughout this process. And so when you're trying to establish those expectations, you really need to know why. What's the root of needing those expectations in place? Is it because, like most rules, something happened bad, like real bad? Like one of the things that started this whole conversation for me was that patient that showed up in my clinic at the 18-month mark in that recliner on that 2-inch foam cushion that turned from rental to purchase, and now they're contracted with 2 or 3 wounds and it's purchased. Okay. And so I'm about to lose my mind. Okay. And so how do we prevent that from ever happening again? So I go up the stairs and say, hey, inpatient folks, can we talk? I really don't want to see that happen again, because I know you don't. And I know you don't even know that happened. Right. So this is kind of where we started asking these questions. What does the agreement need to look like? Who's involved with it? How specific do we get? We're adults, right? We're all licensed people. So how much do we need to tell each other what we need to do? You know, it's a dance right there that's respectful. And how can we get all that done so we can go back to work? Right. And ensure all these outcomes happen. So these are the questions we started asking at this level. Thanks.
Sure. And so now we're going to get into some of the Ohio State examples. So ours are not nearly as in-depth as Pitt's. And when we did it, the context was competitive bid. So I had Ohio State coming to me saying, hey, yeah, we think we're going to start a OSU home medical, and all those patients, you guys can evaluate them. And I was like, wait, what? I'm like, where are they? And we didn't even really have CRT defined, because this was in that phase of competitive bid when we were trying to carve everything out. So I thought, I don't have anything written to say to, again, my leaders, no, sorry, we can't work with that company. And I knew my CRT suppliers had no chance of becoming a whole OSU vendor because they weren't doing oxygen and beds and all that other stuff. So when we wrote ours, it was very much to kind of represent the CRT business, and it was very simple. So then as years have passed, when we have new CRT vendors coming in, because, you know, we've had mergers and acquisitions, and I show it to them, I'm like, this is like what you would expect of a CRT. So when you read this, it's really to keep those bad eggs out. It's to keep those national companies or just drop shipping chairs and acting like the Amazons. It's to keep them out. But then, you know, as things have changed, and I really didn't have a method, I knew that I needed to update it. But when I saw pits, like, Ryan, ours are going to get updated. And so, and I look at, you know, New Motion functions as a CRT. And so we know that these national companies have this component, but we still know there's pressure because as Ohio State, I can't say no to anybody. If a patient wants to use Hover-Round and come in, I'm not allowed to say no. I could educate them. So when you look at ours, again, if you want to start someplace, you can start simple. So this is just the first half. This is, you know, the supplier, this is supplier to clinic, and then to the patient. And then we also did a rotation, because if a patient comes in and says, I don't care, just give me somebody, I don't even want the chair, we can't make that decision. So we say, well, okay, well, if you're worthy of being our supplier and you meet these expectations, we're just going to kind of pass out. Well, the reality is most of the times patients have a relationship because they're getting their second chair. But then there's a group of people that are maybe early into the phase that don't. So the rotation policy is literally to keep us protected for somebody outside of our department to not accuse us of showing favoritism. So you need to protect yourself if you're in that same position. So
just to add on to that.
yeah, please add.
Like in certain clinics, I know some people have like one or two vendors too, where maybe it's not as much of an issue, but it's still very important just to have something about rotation, how you're going to maintain being that, you know, unbiased view. And like in our clinic, we have 5 different vendors that we work with. So it's always kind of, well, why are they getting this day? Why are they getting that day? And so the rotation has been very helpful on our end.
And again, we are respecting you, and this is your patient. We honor that. I'm not taking your patient and giving him to someone else. It is for somebody that is coming in that has no interest bias, and they're just saying, you decide. I can't decide. So if you're in a rural area and you don't have that situation, or if you have, you know, 5, you just need to think about how it applies to you. And we just want you to know these are available. So this is the second half of that policy. And then this is the big vendor policy. So the things that are more common as far as gifts and meals and you know, any type of perception of favoritism or influencing somebody that are pretty common probably everywhere in this state of the world. And this is the second half, as far as, like, there was one period where I was not even allowed to have a pen that had Team Gleason on it. So we were literally taping over our pens because I had an administrator that was very specific, and it's, come on. But you just have to know that's overarching. And then you have your rehab ones, and we have our seating policies. So then I want to pass back to Kathy, or
Add one thing that the UPMC one is for all of UPMC, but we're working on outpatient ones and then also working for inpatient. I think inpatient's been a little bit more wild west recently because we have new therapists and COVID and things was just like, you know, do whatever you need to do, get patients out the door. And I realized we are not following what we're supposed to be doing. So we're going to revamp those. So just sort of keep that in mind if you're looking at those. For those of you that are in inpatient, a lot of our patients don't have a preference because they don't want to be there. They don't want to have a chair because they just learn, you know, maybe just learn they need one. And so, yeah, I think maybe just as important or maybe more important than outpatient, where people are coming back for their second or third and they have an opinion. Early on, they have no opinion, and you may have reasons why you're recommending one or the other, but, you know, it's ultimately like we shouldn't be the one choosing.
just to add on to that real quick too, with the inpatient agreements, like with our hospital, we have 11 different hospital. With our system, we have 11 different inpatient units that we can go to. And so if you do have multiple units like that, it's very important to talk across all of them to see if you can unify that, because a lot of the time it's the same vendors going in those hospitals. And I know Rachel's been a very good advocate for going into those other hospitals and working with those therapists to make sure that those agreements are unified across the system.
Oh, that's okay. So, going back to that scary experience of your patient through inpatient rehab that fell through the cracks, that you don't know where they landed and you hope they got what they wanted, really kind of boils down to some level of communication. How can we pass the baton to the right person along the way that it doesn't slow down the process and all that? So a lot of this agreement type stuff is a two-way communication thing. It's who works through that so that it's established, and it's to protect the whole team. So not only just the clinician, so that we know what to expect from the suppliers, but suppliers, how many of you in the room have said that therapist takes forever to get me their paperwork? Oh, really? All your therapists are on time? Awesome. Well, I hear from others that sometimes they're like, these therapists in certain areas, are we pointing fingers over here? No, I'm just kidding. Oh, they're in the next course. That's right. They're in the documentation course. No, but it's also for suppliers to be able to say, we have an understanding and agreement together also that you will do your part so that we can keep this thing going, that our patients get what they need. How many of you are in management roles in your institutions? So you have some authority to help write these things and get input on your level. How many of you are like me on I'm the staff therapist and I answer to people, but I also see big needs. So not only like peon in here. Okay, come on. There we go. Now I found my people. No. So you have a role under your administration to communicate with these within your scope. And so before you go blazing like I have done in times, making decisions and trying to work through things, sometimes you got to slow back down and go, how does this fit within my institution as I interact with my managers and people above me? So anyway, just wanted to toss that out as you take some of these things from us back to your context. Consider where you are, what role you play in developing the communication tool that will work for you in your context. So these are just examples we've been through.
Great, thank you. So when you kind of continue to look at resources, as I've been able to experience the growth in our department. So we started with just 2 of us. We started a wheelchair clinic 1 afternoon a week, and then it went to 2 afternoons a week. And fast forward 29 years, and I have 12 team members 5 days a week that does seating. So when you start getting bigger and bigger, you also have a lot more people looking at you. So when they said, well, Teresa, how are you holding up your end of the bargain? It was suggested to me that I have annual meetings to review the vendor guidelines that I said we are doing. So we started with these just supplier clinician meetings. It gave us a chance to get off stage, to talk about the successes, talk about the challenges, align all of our efforts. And this is just the most recent quarterly meeting that we had. We invite everyone. We ask the suppliers, you bring whoever you want. It's open, bring the office staff, your payers, your funding, your ATPs, your techs, whoever you want, bring in. And then we try to get as much of the clinicians there that we can. And we give a chance to give OSU updates, anything from projects or students or staffing or questions that we have. And then we turn it over to the supplier. You have the floor. Tell us what you want. It was so successful that it went from annual meetings to quarterly meetings. We know it takes time. We try to do it as early as we can, but it gives you that time to get off stage and just pause for a minute and just think about how we could be better partners in care. So this is just a suggestion that you could implement if it's something that makes sense for you. So I talked earlier about the manufacturer role. We don't want to ignore the role of the manufacturer. We know that you're an expert in the equipment, questions and usage, and you could help be a support system to all of us for solving the CRT team and patient questions, and we can give you feedback that you can take back. We really don't have expectations for manufacturer's role in our clinic, and the same thing with integration. That's something we might do. If you guys have that, we'd love to see it. And so we just wanted to make sure that that was mentioned. And then Vince had a good suggestion about next steps as far as guidelines. I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah. So one thing that we're looking at is like how do we unify guidelines? Like obviously everybody in here is interested in reviewing this process from inpatient to outpatient, how clinics actually function and operate, how some of the guidelines that we're reviewing right now actually apply to your own clinic. And it's really something that we've realized with our 3 clinics is they're somewhat uniform. They have the same structure, same skeleton, but they really are geared towards your own clinic individually. And so like working with NARTS is they have their standards of practice with all suppliers. It's a good way for us to be able to reach out and maybe unify some of the guidelines to provide maybe a template for clinics to use and suppliers to use. So it's better communication and there's actually something tangible that you could actually use and maybe start the discussion. And so we're thinking in the future that would be a good way that we can maybe take this. And so one of our first steps in actually mapping out how we're actually going to do the inpatient to outpatient transition of care is just come up with a basic flow chart. And I know the text is pretty small here, but I'll try to run through it. But basically we just came up with a basic structure to go through the flow of a client whenever they actually are admitted to inpatient. Do they need AT? Yes, no. Obviously, that's the first question. Is it going to be something more complex? Yes, no. Something on more of the basic DME guidelines. That's not something that we really have been focusing on following through. We're really focusing more on the complex side of the need. And so going from there, is it actually charted within the medical record? Within our system, we have 2 different medical records for inpatient and outpatient care. So we're actually working on unifying it all. So it's all under one chart, which would make seeing this information a lot easier. But as of right now, that's kind of the next step is the AT charted in the actual system. Has the vendor been contacted? Have they started to make those relationships work? From there, has the wheelchair actually been evaluated? Has it been spec'd out? Have we started to actually go through the process? And one thing that we realized, what we kind of established already, is the vendor is really the one promoting the follow-up after discharge, and the health professionals don't really become aware of anything that happens afterward. They don't know if it's a positive outcome, negative outcome. Like in some of the cases we're going to review shortly, you'll see there could be some very detrimental issues that occur without that proper follow-up. And so we took this current model and added in just one small step whenever that's information is actually charted in the medical record. And so ideally, if we had the same medical record system in use, we'd be able to actually just route that chart directly to our outpatient, make sure we get that same information for follow-up. But a workaround for us that we realized was just entering it into a shared folder. So UPMC is an entire health system. We have one shared folder that goes up into the cloud across all our systems. And we just found out this is something we're in the middle of actually creating right now, is just creating a QI project where we could just track those inpatients that are maybe more the complex side that we know might need follow-up in the future, or we're interested to see how they're going to be moving forward. They can be put in by whoever therapist that is. And then on the back end, we're going to be able to see those clients on the outpatient side and know that we can just schedule a quick telephone follow-up if we need to, or we can schedule an actual in-person or telehealth final fitting, just to make sure that one of our health professionals are present during that final fitting in case something else is needed, or we need to intervene for some reason. That way, we're not really putting a lot of the pressure on the patient to reach out, because we know that doesn't always happen, or the vendor itself. So we're really working as an entire team for that follow-up care and be able to try to promote good follow-up qualities and be able to track those individuals over time too. So even that initial follow-up step is just making sure we're following up throughout the entire lifespan of that device. And so those are just 2 easy switches that we figured would be easy to implement in any real setting, as long as there's a shared drive system in place. And I know OSU kind of already has a system model down. We're in that process of developing this QI project. and I go Kathy's and the other stages of it. So it's a really good view to see each other in each step for this process.
Just a comment too on the, you know, this process you figure out, of course, I hope all recognize must be HIPAA compliant. So when there is a break from inpatient, outpatient, you may be like me in 2 different cost centers with doctors that work in 2 different ones. So when there's a discharge, there is a break in care that from a HIPAA standpoint, I really cannot do anything with that patient until I get a referral. So somewhere we got to facilitate the referral process so that I can access the chart in the appropriate manner. So, and whatever's being stored, obviously better be stored in a HIPAA way and all those different things. So that work has to be done.
Mhm. We're going to go ahead and shift to some cases to give you some examples, and then we'll come back with some more resources that may be helpful.
Great. So this, yeah. Okay. So this is one that I would consider more of a success. It's not fully finished, so I can't totally speak, but I think it's mostly a success. So a gentleman with an acute incomplete thoracic spinal cord injury was in acute care, and then our inpatient rehab unit, slow progression to ambulation. He got COVID while he was in rehab, he had UTI. He was a larger guy, and a lot of things just sort of kept spiraling, and we thought maybe he would walk, and then it just really wasn't happening. So the challenge here, aside from he needed a chair, was that he was discharging to Idaho. So that much more complicated than, across town. So discharging to Idaho, we identified earlier in the stay that he was going to need a supplier that could service him there. And we found a supplier that was here and there. We found a therapist group in near where he was going to be that was comfortable and had experience doing this. We sort of confirmed that with them and with the supplier that, they were comfortable managing because he obviously was not coming back to our outpatient clinic for a fitting. And so, we identified early, allowed time. So we asked the national supplier to find a loaner that was going to work for him, which is a little challenging because we were asking for a bariatric chair. And so that had to get shipped in from another office, bring it in to fit him, in addition to doing specs and all of that. They actually ordered his purchase chair while he was in rehab, kind of assuming it was going to get covered, and was shipping it. So the Pittsburgh office ordered it, Idaho delivered it. And we did a lot of coordination, including a video call with the Idaho office and with the home health company. And so the patient, our group in Pittsburgh, supplier in Pittsburgh, supplier in Idaho, therapist in Idaho, we're all on the same page. We were not able to do a telehealth fitting or like us see them, but I think given the scenario, we felt like that was the best case scenario. He was with supplier and therapists who were comfortable managing his care. And they were going to, we had a game plan of like, what if it didn't work or what if something's not right? And they could contact the Pittsburgh team to make that work. So challenging out of state discharge, but planning ahead seemed to work reasonably well.
Good communication. That had a lot of potential problems on it, didn't it? So let's see, from UAB, I'll give you this story and see if it sounds familiar to you. But there's an older gentleman with incomplete C5 spinal cord injury with no active movement, though he was provided with a loaner group 3 power chair upon discharge, which I don't know about your scenarios. That is not always the case that we can provide that. We'll get into that discussion in a bit, a healthy, positive discussion in a bit. A group 3 power wheelchair with multiple power functions was recommended and in process. So we're very fortunate he got home with that. So 3 months later, the wheelchair was delivered to the patient's home and we saw him by telehealth. The PT was in the clinic, supplier at the home. Having that group 3 power chair for him to go home with was incredible because it allowed him and his wife to make the necessary changes to their home, kind of go through the, yes.
The therapist that was in the clinic during the telehealth visit, was it the inpatient therapist that prescribed it or an outpatient?
Outpatient. It was me. So yeah, that whole process started and the supplier was good at communicating through our little spreadsheet that we had developed to ensure that that happened. And because of their teamwork, if he had not done his part, we might not have known this ever happened. Yeah, so I got the referral, was able to open up that case and see them for the final fit. But anyway, allow the family to make those home modifications, work on their transfers, begin that home health therapy, work on transfers from a loaner power chair so that, you know, they could continue working in that context, make the adaptations, look at vehicles. And it gave him the time as an older gentleman to process through what this meant, take the time to drive in his home environment instead of a rushed thing, a quick switch from one type that sometimes it's just hard on people to do. So allowing that was a good opportunity for them to make those adaptations and adjustments, given that good fortune of having a group 3 power chair. We have a couple that didn't turn out so great. Go Pitt.
All right. This
That was the good news.
this is some of why we're doing this, or why we're talking about it. So I actually saw this person in the outpatient clinic. She had a stroke, was an inpatient rehab, 20 days. I don't know, in our setting, that's pretty normal. Maybe a little long, actually. She'd had a kidney transplant in the past, but was pretty stable, didn't need dialysis. She left at a light mid-assist, functional mobility level, walking, transfers, went home with a rental K4 with anticipated progress for ambulation. No referral for any seating. Anticipate she wouldn't need the chair, apparently. I wasn't there, but referred to the outpatient team by a wound clinic 16 months later with significant medical decline. She's doing dialysis at home. Her husband was actually some angel person who could do dialysis and take care of her wounds and all these other things, but she had wounds at least those places, I think many other places. And husband's doing total assist everything. The K4 chair, he said she was falling out of it. He called the rental DME company. They said they didn't have anything else that would be helpful. And so he gave it back and ordered a recliner on the internet, got her some sort of foam situation on the internet, and said the wound clinic said, this is absolutely a mess. Please go get some help. So they came to us. And at that point, you know, we did what we could. We got a tilt and space chair, pressure relieving cushion, pressure mapping, all this other stuff, help for ADLs, transfers, etc. But this is one where I feel like we could have caught it a lot earlier if she'd been referred for a follow-up. Maybe also if other people knew that they could refer some other things, but certainly had we followed up 3, 6, maybe 9 or 12 months before she got to this situation. And so this is one that hopefully with new processes of following up with people before they're referred or just following automatically, that we should catch this before it becomes quite this bad.
And I think you all can see where the possibilities of breakdowns exist. There's multiple places. And, you know, I think we've all spent those times trying to process through, okay, then upon discharge, everyone gets a referral. Okay, anybody done that process before? Anybody besides us? That's a nightmare. Okay, because not every referral at the 2 to 3 months needs to come back for CRT. They've made progress or whatever. So you can't write the referral for everyone. Okay, so we'll just put it on the patient. Call us if you need us. Does that work? Not really, because I mean, they're all on pain medication. Half of them are on oxygen. They don't know what they need, right? All right, so we'll put it on the home health therapist. Yes, sir.
Wasn't there an ATP involved this person had a stroke?
No, they got a rental K4 chair, so there was not an ATP involved. That's a good question, but I don't know.
One thing that I uncovered is that an inpatient, if the ambulation goals are like in-home mobility or community mobility, and the therapist says it's a rental wheelchair, it's a whole different series than if it's a purchase chair, and it becomes under the case manager. So they're going to call a DME company because most CRTs don't do rentals.
Please stick with the optimistic goals.
Yeah, that's you're preaching. Yeah, you're preaching my song here, but that's yeah. But the things I wanted to add here is Yeah, why don't we just refer everyone for outpatient follow-up? Like, well, half of these patients that look like that don't actually need it. And like, I just told you how many hospitals we have, like holy volume. We can't manage that in our outpatient clinic. And like Kathy said, we can't expect patients to figure all this out either. Like they're drinking from a fire hydrant, trying to just take all of this information in. How do I get home? How do I transfer? This is just beyond what many people can manage.
Yeah, and then you really get into the area too, of over prescribing too. You don't want to be over prescribing what their needs are. You don't know how they're actually gonna present moving forward, especially after this type of diagnosis. But also, I know specifically with our system, it has to go to physician education as well. And so whenever they're creating those orders right off the bat, where maybe it's for some type of DME, the way we have our contract set up with our DME companies, the order gets sent directly to them. So as soon as a physician makes that order, it gets sent directly to that DME company automatically. And there's really no opportunity for intervention with a certified ATP or a CRT supplier. And I think that's where you have to kind of take another step back and say, is this a larger issue with the entire health system? And is it more so education for the health professionals in CRT specifically? And so I think that's another thing that we realize is just education overall.
I agree with everything that was said, but I think we also need to keep in mind, and again, none of us in this room knowing this patient. Yes, there are a lot of comorbidities that maybe, even if they were stable, maybe that should have been a red flag that there might be more coming up. But on the other hand, if those of us probably most people in the room have been in the industry long enough to know that patient, if they were seen recently, might have had, inpatient rehab, where you said for 20 days, a lot of, 20 years ago, they were there for months and months. And I think sometimes the decreased length of stays are a factor in why we either underprescribe or sometimes overprescribe.
Yeah.
I work in outpatient, not inpatient, but in my outpatient clinic, I've had to, fix that, but I've also had to fix the person that got a manual tilt and space chair that's now almost ambulatory.
So we're gonna politely stop you because we're not here to tell you that we're proud of these cases. We're just trying to illustrate that we're not here to show that everything's, rainbows and unicorns. We're going to get to some strategies and safety nets in my soapbox of having all kinds of triggers. But I want to let Kathy to press you more about another case. And then we're going to come back to more solutions. Okay.
I think that hopefully you will take home the message that it's going to take all hands on deck to ensure the follow through, that everybody's doing their role, and that the clinicians involved take each individual patient where they are, where they can be, that we pass that baton appropriately. We have the team members in place. Because as you alluded to, it can go either way. You may prescribe something that comes out of inpatient rehab because we want to just jump and get everybody something because I'm scared to death they're not going to get anything. And then they end up with something more than what they need. Or then it can go the other way. Like this gentleman, 25-year-old young man injured in a motorcycle accident, T5 spinal cord injury, fractured his left humerus, tries to go through inpatient rehab, has some limitations because he's non-weight bearing on his left arm. He received a rented manual wheelchair with a 2-inch cushion with the hope of, let's see what happens with your left arm. You're young, you're healthy, generally speaking. You get that arm healed, you should be able to push a K5 in time. Okay, so let's get you that rented cushion, and then let's get you that referral. Well, that referral never happened. And they tell the family members, hey, look, once your arm, you get full weight bearing, you start your therapies, then go ahead and call and set that up at the wheelchair clinic. Well, how much instruction do you get when you leave a hospital? I mean, simplest thing ever, and you're going to go home with 12 pages of information that you may not ever even go through. So obviously that did not happen. Since then, a couple of more hospitalizations for medical issues. Now it's 14 months later. They're coming up for air, realizing I should go see my spinal cord physician for follow-up. And at this point, now we've gained weight. Now we have a stage 4 sore. Now we have contractures to deal with, and the chair had purchased out. So, but the good news is he did get referred. We can start working toward the uphill battle of getting him something that he needs, but where in the world? There was multiple places this went wrong. And I think that's what we want to challenge you all to go back to your places, is backtrack a little bit to where some of the breakdowns are. Let me just tell you from our QI project, don't try to fix them all at one time. Start with a couple that you can improve on and then go to the next couple, because this is a multiple layer, multiple people involved process. So I'm going to pass it back. So we'll give you some other practical things.
Getting your blood pressure risen, aren't we? So this slide can be an entire presentation. So there is a discussion on the spinal cord listserv about what chairs people get when they leave. And so there's always certain scenarios. We don't know the details of what happens in each case. We don't know the family situation, the home situation, but we do know that like our vendor guidelines say as similar as possible. But we found that when a loaner chair is too nice, then when their regular chair comes in, patients don't want it because they're used to their chair. It happens to us. And so we want to make sure that, you know, we want this rigid chair, we want this great chair that is available, but then they get used to it and then they don't want their chair that has come in. So are you like, does that never happen to you? Yeah, it's not nicer, they're used to it. Yes. Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you. So also we have had situations, I wrote the slide, so that a safe, effective K4 sometimes motivates those people to do the follow-up that is needed. And so I have had personal discussions with people that have been in that K4 that are, I can't wait till I get my chair. Okay, did you get your Medicaid pending finished? Did you file that paperwork? Did you, you know, so when we make things a little too easy, sometimes it backfires on us. I've heard suggestions of pre-stocking the delivery of final chair, but then that just loses all your individuality. And so that we don't want someone, you know, the reality is you cannot get funding until the person is discharged, but the person has to be discharged in order to get funding. So there's a lot of pressure that's put on the suppliers and the equipment that's getting out, and the timeline with whether it's supply chain or funding reimbursement is longer and longer. So we're depleting the stock of the loaner chairs. There's a whole theory on if someone needs a power chair, but they're given a manual chair. And early in my career, we required it. No vendor, we need you to give them a power chair. Well, then we realized that some homes are not accessible. Some homes do need modified. People don't have transportation set up. So there's certain situations where the manual chair is good enough for them to get by with until they get that power wheelchair. We know it may decrease some autonomy and independence. We also know that the power chairs are getting scarce. So again, this can be an entire discussion in and of itself. You guys want to add anything?
Quick thing for the suppliers in the room. When you are being asked to put a power chair out as a loaner, we know your blood pressure goes up, okay? Because you may never, ever see it again. It may get sold on the market for a little something to make me feel better. I'll let you guys figure that out. So therapists, have these conversations with your suppliers when you're asking them to do some things that are very costly or that could be a loss to them if we're asking them or demanding them to provide things like that. Anyway, so have those healthy conversations as a team. Yes, sir.
Yeah, can you talk more about the line of K4 when you order a K5? It's like an envision the scenario. We get them, I work in inpatient spinal cord injury. We get them fit in a seating position system that's really good for a time. Put them 3 months until it takes them to get their chair and they're sitting in a K4. And the posture is going to change, right?
So what we do, I'm looking at my team, we get our outpatient team complaining all the time that the chair's not nice enough. And so then we become mediators because we can look and see, oh gosh, they do need more postural support. Supplier, can you help us with this? We continue to work that once that loaner is home, what can we do to help maximize the use and the setup so that we can keep them as good in posture as we can. We make sure their skin distribution is good. We make sure they can do the pressure distribution. We try to be a liaison because our outpatient spinal cord team is saying exactly what you're saying. Oh, well, I'm trying to teach them transfer training, but I'm not using the chair they're going to have. I'm trying to do this. We know that, but we've got to figure out kind of a plan B. As far as the 3 months, that's where we need to make sure that that paperwork is in the vendor's hand the day of discharge. So if the vendor has to wait 2 to 3 months after the patient's discharged, then that's going to be longer for them to get approval from the insurance and longer for the chair to be shipped to them. So getting back to, we all have a piece of it and looking at why did this happen? What is available? And there are many people that get rigid chairs. I'm not trying to downplay that. It's just that perception of it's not all or nothing. Sometimes it's okay for a scenario for that person if they're safe and it's not going to provide them harm. We need to work as a team because we can't always have that best scenario. Heather? Oh, we gotta go.
Yeah, the stability of that chair right now with the mechanics, what we're doing with shoulders, and we're already guessing so much on inpatient rehab, and then if we put in something completely different, then we're gonna really be.
Every case is individual. We have to work together and we have to work with our inpatient, our outpatient, our seating, and our supplier. That's my take home. So we've talked a lot about this, about looking at the trends, talking about the discussions, look at the collaboration, go back and look at your system where there's gaps and make sure that we're all working on the same goal towards the benefit of that patient and really look at that communication and process. Whatever you need to do, we use SharePoint as a tracking system. We track from inpatient to outpatient all the way through follow-up, and we're continuing to track them long after they've received their chair. We have methods in place for the vendors to queue back to us. So when it gets like some of those cases earlier, if there's so many repairs coming in for the physician to sign, we would say, pause. They can't be using this chair correctly. They should not be replacing this joystick every 3 months. So we have triggers and we're trying to develop a lot of triggers within our system, which is not easy. It is not easy to do this, but it requires a lot of over communication. This is an example of the SharePoint database. And essentially we just enter the information, reports automatically go out to the vendors who give us updates on the cases, and we continually are communicating in the most effective way to keep each other informed. And it's a database you could develop. And I really wanted to put this one in, and you could come tomorrow to listen to my colleague Matt and Heather about our outcomes. We do outcomes tracking with the FMA, and I was noticing when somebody's score drops, they call us and say, you might want to check out these patients. So I went back a whole year and I tracked how many patients would have been lost in the system had we not had FMA. And I had people whose score dropped and I would call them and they're like, oh yeah, my chair hasn't been working. I went back to my old chair. Well, did you call your vendor? Nope. Do you know who your vendor is? Yep. Well, why didn't you call them? So if it wasn't that intervention to prompt them, they would have abandoned their chair because they didn't understand who to call. We had people reporting pressure sores or falls that weren't doing anything about it. And we would have never known because they received their chair and we would have seen them 5 years later for their next chair. So this is something that has really helped us as a system to monitor people over time, because even though we do 1-year follow-ups, we have a pretty high cancellation rate. And the irony is some of these people canceled their appointment 2 weeks before they reported they were having trouble. Like, why didn't you come to your appointment? Well, I didn't really know what it was for. So we just have to continually over communicate. This is a resource you guys can look at later about patients committing to come into their appointments. But as Kathy said, these people are overwhelmed. We need to find multiple oversights and tracking. We need to get the systems to work together. We need to look for opportunities for follow-up and outcome management. And we know they all require resources and time, which are very scarce. So I'm going to just, over communicating is a continual thing we have to do in building systems and safety nets that can trigger into each other when we might need to tap someone on the shoulder to say, you might want to get this patient into, back into the clinic. And then ultimately we have to use our community and have that relationship with our vendors. So we know when we can collaborate with each other. And a whole other presentation is that across state lines, because, telehealth, you can't bill in another state. We have, there's a compact rule, but we've developed resources. Like we did a delivery for a patient that left Pitt. We've worked with Shepherds to do deliveries. When you're putting that supplier out by themselves and having to deliver a chair that they didn't even know the patient, that's putting them in a bad situation. If they have us with them, together we can problem solve and figure that out. So there wasn't enough time for all of those case studies, but we're hoping to continue this discussion. As we said, we started this last ISS and we just started collaborating and networking and, you know, breaking the surface. And we welcome anyone that has a curiosity in this area to continue this discussion. Did you guys want to have any closing remarks?
Yeah, I mean, one point on that slide too is just the over communication. I can't stress that enough. Communication between inpatient, outpatient, communication with the physicians, communication with the vendors, and really just making sure that if something's going on, you just call, walk up the stairs, communicate. One thing that we've really realized is if you don't communicate, nobody knows that it's going on. So the more that you're just open, you create those relationships. We have engineers that sit in inpatient a couple times a week. They sit in outpatient, they see the same people. And so we really have a nice cohesive relationship with all entities of our UPMC system. Jeannie?
Over communicate with the client as well.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, could not forget the client.
Just give me one step. And,
Yep.
and I'm calling just to let you know the doctor got the paperwork. And it reduces everybody's.
And I've had them now tell me what you heard me say,
Yeah.
Yeah,
you know, like
there is.
return, because something, okay, yep, I got it. Okay, now I want to make sure you understand.
And one point on that.
Like paperwork stuff and then. there's a-
Absolutely. And one really key piece of that is having an amazing support staff, having a great front office support staff that can interact with those clients and relay that information just as well as the health professional, the supplier can, makes a world of a difference.